folks, allow me to introduce Sam Stouros. Sam is a dad. He is a cottage goer. It's not part of his bio, but it is part of his bio. And he has a knack with cars. He learned that when he was in Kitchener with his at his dad's garage, which is kind of a really handy thing. I wish I had a dad that was in the auto care industry. It would have saved me a lot of efforts. He's studied electrical engineering and he's a retired federal employee, and but still loves working on cars. He does everything from dash cams to brakes and on. And he loves learning new things and travel and playing sports. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Bernie. Yes. Sorry, Margie, you kind of put your finger up there.
Oh, no, no. I'm just going, go ahead. Take it away.
Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yes, I'm originally from Kitchener, Ontario. In fact, my wife and I are both from there. And my dad had a garage when I was a kid. First, he had a restaurant actually when I was younger, but then he bought a garage when he sold the restaurant as well. And that's perfect timing because I became a teenager, and that was in the late 60s, early 70s, and everybody was into cars, and I certainly was too. And I was able to get cars at a cheap price because my dad could find these cars that needed repairs and people couldn't afford the repairs. And he would pick them up, and I'd end up, and my brothers, I had two other brothers, and we had cars to drive. And of course, we had to fix the cars. No car back then was, back then you had to change the spark plugs and change the wires at least once a year, depending how far you drove, twice a year if you drove far. Cars have come a long way since, the 60s and 70s. You see now that, even the 4-cylinder cars now are 200-300 horsepower. Back then, if you had a 4-cylinder car, which most people didn't, it was lucky to have 100 horse. It was usually in the 80s. So nobody wanted a slow vehicle back then. Everybody wanted horsepower because gasoline was cheap. And, lots of, well, when we were young, I was a young kid, I got myself a Firebird, and then I got a Corvette and things like that as I, started to work on my own. But they were, gas guzzlers, but back then it was, 45 cents a liter, if I remember right, when things converted. Now we're at over $1.20 again. So anyway, I've been around cars a long time. I've learned a few things, and I wanted to have this opportunity to pass along what I've learned when it comes to car maintenance, things that have saved me money when buying a car, when owning a car, when having a car repaired, all those things. You can save money. Just don't set yourself up for a problem. I remember my dad. I remember I had a customer come into the garage one time when I was there. I pumped gas when I finished school and came to the garage, and he got really angry. He says, "Can you imagine? This guy shows up. He says, he hands me the keys. He says, 'There's a squeak in my car. Can you fix it?'" And I went, "What do you mean, Dad?" He says, "What's wrong?" He says, "I have no idea where this squeak is." He says, "I got to drive it around for trying to figure it out." He says, at least he would tell me it's coming from the left or right when I put the brakes on, when I don't, when I, give me some information. So that's the first thing I want to tell you. When it comes to car maintenance, don't set yourself up for problems. If you don't have a garage like me and you know much about cars, don't pull into your mechanic's place and say there's a squeak in my car, because these days, especially if you're going to I think, Denny, you said you take your car to the dealer. That's $120 right off the bat just to diagnose that car for a problem. So, if you can give those mechanics some kind of indication of, where the noise is, when it occurs, when it doesn't occur, it's going to save them time and ends up saving you money. It's just as simple as that. And, well, I'm not a dealer kind of guy, because I know the rates are that's the highest price. When you go to a dealer, they charge you the most. Electrical problems, you pull in there, it's $180 to diagnose your electrical problem, and then parts after that. So I'm a person, I certainly don't say, you don't have to buy I'm not saying not to buy a new car. There's a lot of nice things about new cars, but depreciation on that new car the first year, you're looking at least $5,000, if not higher. I'm a person that buys used cars. Why? Because I know how to fix them. And I have a good idea when there's something wrong with a car, to stay away from certain models, certain years, because I spend the time, I fix them, I see these kinds of problems. So what I'm telling you is that, I know a fair bit about cars. I don't know everything. I'm not pretending I'm an expert on every model and make. There's just too many out there. Two of my neighbors bought Porsche last few years. And one guy came to me, asked about replacing just the stereo in the car. This car, it was a 2016 Boxer, Porsche Boxer. I mean, there are so many different designs of that stereo system. It took me days to find out whether it had fiber optic cable or not. And it sure enough, it did. So there's no way I could get this thing, who else has fiber optics in their stereo system? Come on. Give me a break. This guy, I told him, I said, you're going to just replace the whole thing. Don't spend the time sending to Porsche and all the rest. Anyway, when it comes to cars, don't, like I say, don't set yourself up for a problem and spending money that you don't need. There's a lot of information online. There's a lot of garbage online, but there is a lot of good information. If you're going to buy a new car, there's something called Consumer Report, not Consumer Digest, Consumer Report. And that's a organization that's been around for a long time. They don't take sponsorship from any manufacturer. They do diagnosis from people's input that they get that own cars. They go out and survey people. They have a very good record of information when it comes to what cars are reliable and what cars are not. And that's what you want to. I mean, in the end, I got some fancy cars myself, but in the end, it's transportation. It takes you to and from wherever you're going. So if it doesn't have, as I tell people, if it doesn't have Bluetooth or it doesn't have the fancy heated steering wheel, if it runs between here and there, that's the most important thing. If the heated steering wheel works and the engine doesn't, you're not going anywhere. So reliability is number one, when you're buying a vehicle, whether it's new or used, I don't care what. And I've owned lots of cars. I've owned lots of different tires and cars. I've had experience with Firestone tires on my Corvette. They're ripping apart back in the early 80s. So, I've been around. I can tell people what my experiences are, which models and makes to stay away from, which models and makes, are decent. But I did make a mistake once, and I'll tell you this. This was back in British Columbia when I lived out there. I got into Honda cars back then when they were, in the early 90s when basically the Japanese were taking over from North American cars as far as reliability went. And our first Honda was actually bought in British Columbia, a Honda Accord, and very good car in many ways. Wasn't perfect, but in many ways. But I made the mistake of telling our neighbor that, you should buy a Honda, vehicle. So she went out and she bought a Honda vehicle. Well, a month later, she says, "Oh, I'm having all kinds of problems with my Honda." And I said, "Oh, that's odd because, my experience is that they're damn good vehicles." So I went and opened the hood of her car and I looked inside, and unbelievable. I mean, this thing was, you could tell that somebody just hacked across, they put different engine in there, had different wiring all over the place. Somebody just messed around with this vehicle. So I'm careful now when I do recommend cars, makes and models and even Consumer Digest, but don't just go out there and buy, especially a used one, without some information. And that's what I'll pass along now. If you don't know much about cars and you're going to buy a car and you've done some research and said, Hondas or Toyotas or whatever, or what I'm looking for, take it to a garage that you trust, that knows something about vehicles. You can get what's called a pre-purchase inspection. It'll cost you $100, $150. That will save you money. In fact, I'll pass along something that just happened in our own family. My wife has this Honda Civic, and she's been wanting a SUV for a long time now. And our son has a Subaru. So I said, well, Subarus are doing very well. You know, their engines are last a long time, and other than the head gasket issue, you got a very decent vehicle. Anyway, so she sees this Subaru Forester. She says, "Oh, I like that one." We took it out for a ride. She liked it. So I said, "Okay, I'll take it to a mechanic," because I have a buddy who's a mechanic. I don't just look at it myself. So anyway, take it to the mechanic, put it up on the hoist. He looks underneath. He says, "Well," he says, "the head gasket's starting to leak." That job, if you don't know much about cars, a head gasket replacement in a car is anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000. Not something you want to be surprised with after you buy a car. It's just not. And that cost me, I think I gave him $50 for his time. That little piece of information allowed us to go back to the guy selling the car and said, "Listen, you fix the head gasket, and yeah, we'll buy your car." And that's exactly what's happening right now. The car is being repaired, not out of my pocket, out of their pocket. So things like that. As I say, if you're going to buy a vehicle brand new, check the consumer reports. If it's not, check the consumer reports anyway, and buy a used car based on the reliability, and then take it to a mechanic. Don't make the mistake of driving around the block thinking, "Oh, it's great." No, you're taking a huge risk, and I do not recommend that kind of thing. I know Tanya there, her husband knows a lot about cars. He has a Camaro, a very nice one. I know about. So he's a guy that, he has some fair bit of knowledge, and that's important. He'll know, just from, if you're a car person, you're around a lot of people who own cars, and they talk about, cars to stay away from and cars, to own. Back when I was a kid, I'm talking about cars not to own. Does anybody here remember the what's called a Pontiac Vega, I think it was called, or something like that? That was North American cars. Yeah,
I remember it. Yeah.
Anyway, the vast majority of those cars lasted about 2 years on them, after people bought them. That was a North American way of competing against the Japanese, and these cars had aluminum blocks that just did not seat the piston rings properly, and these things, within a year, they were burning about a quart of oil a mile. Just not a vehicle you want to own. Anyway, I'm talking about new cars. Yeah, I didn't want to just talk about that. I want to talk about other things, but interrupt me at any time if any questions. I'll gladly try and answer them. I can't guarantee I know everything, but if I don't, I'll try and find out for you. Anyway, next thing I want to talk about is I put it down, things that do or do not help your car last a while, especially if you're a small business owner and you have to get between here and there. Okay, you bought this reliable vehicle, and you just want to make sure it lasts a long time. Well, I tell people all along, the most important thing that you can do for your car is change your oil. Just regularly change that oil. And I can pass along a horror story. We have a neighbor not too far from us right now who actually leased a Toyota product, a good Toyota product, but he had the great idea that since it was a lease, he wasn't going to change the oil because in a couple of years, he was going to turn it back in, right? Sounds logical, right? Hey, I can save, 100, maybe $200 a year changing the oil. I just won't change it when 4 or 5 years come. Well, sure enough, he had problems with his engine. Toyota has a 6-cylinder engine that has a specific problem. It's called sludging. The oil sludges when it gets really hot, and he blew this engine. And it cost him $5,000 to replace the engine on that vehicle. The original estimate was $8,000, but he found a used one. Anyway, there's my first tip for anybody. Just change that oil regularly. And I want to say regularly, these days there's 2 options, right? There's regular oil and there's synthetic. And if you have a newer vehicle, you're stuck. It's synthetic. You know, they're going to tell you synthetic or the warranty's not good. But if you have older cars like me, you have the option, right? And I'm a person that says if it's an older car and you have regular oil and it can save you, maybe $50 every oil change, do it. Because I've had cars, my Honda Accord, my last Honda Accord I had, 450,000 kilometers on this car. 2.3 liter 4-cylinder engine. That thing went everywhere, everywhere. I mean, at any time of year, everywhere. Snowstorms, hockey tournaments, lacrosse tournaments, US, Canada, everywhere. And anyway, just passing along, regular oil is cheaper. Synthetic oil is better, and I'm not going to say it's not, but for the cost, I haven't been convinced yet. Again, if you're stuck with a car that requires it, use it, right? I'm not going to say not, because if something goes wrong, you're rewarded. Yes.
Okay, I have a question or comment. A lot of the new cars now, they seem to go forever, I don't know, 5,000 or whatever it is before they need an oil change. So given that when people are purchasing, they're waiting for that light to come on to say, it is time to change your oil. Is that your recommendation, or do you think people should do it before then?
Okay, depends. Okay, I'll answer this question. Depends on what's been set up, because I change oil regularly in people's cars. I've been in cars where the setting is actually earlier. Some cars are set at 5,000 kilometers. And that's, to me, is kind of early, even for regular oil. Unless you're driving in the Sahara Desert, you do not need to change your oil at 5,000 kilometers, even with regular oil. 8,000 kilometers is what I recommend for regular oil. Synthetic oil, 10,000. Now there's where I go the other direction. There's people out there and there's manufacturers telling you that you can put, leave the synthetic oil in for 14,000 kilometers. I do not recommend that. No, that's pushing your car. And like I say, the most important thing keeping your car cooled, other than the radiator, is the oil, and it lubricates that engine and keeps it cool. So that's my recommendation. 10,000 kilometers. That's pretty standard for most places. But I have seen, especially with the Volkswagen these days, I don't know why they want to recommend 14,000 or beyond kilometers between synthetic oil changes. I know they're more expensive, but honestly, I don't agree with it. 8,000 regular, 10,000 synthetic.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, what else did I write down here? Oh yes, some minor things that, I mean, I'm a fussy person because I'm a car guy, and I get into a lot of cars, and I can explain. I get turned off. I get turned off really fast when I get into a car that's really dirty. It tells me something. it tells me that more than likely this person just gets in the vehicle, turns the keys, and drives. And when it's all done, they just shut the key off and wait for the next day, right? Certainly I'm not a person like that. I like listening when I'm driving my car, any squeaks and rattles, because those things tell me, they're really warning signs. If you hear a rattle in a car, more than likely it's the struts in the front end, or the linkages, you hear a little tapping. Those things are important because you can prevent worse problems. But if like I say, I get into a car that's really dirty, it kind of tells me that more than likely they don't pay attention much to the vehicle. And like it or not, you're driving along at, sometimes at 120 kilometers an hour. You have a vehicle that weighs at least 3,000 pounds. Your life is in your hands, and everybody in that car with you is in your hands. I do not recommend that you just assume everything is going to go right. I had a guy, actually, I'll tell another story. It was the first time I met him was last fall. He was recommended to me from a friend. And I changed the oil in his Sonata. It was a decent night. He didn't drive it very far. It only had 160,000 kilometers, and it was at least 10 years old, if I remember right. Anyway, he comes to me this spring and he says, I got this noise coming from my front end of my car. And I said, oh, I said, you mind looking at it? I said, sure. Came over, I took it around the block. Certainly, there was a squeak. There was a definite squeak in the front end of the car. I said, well, how long have you had these tires? Because it was in the spring when it had, this noise was. He said, well, I put them on myself. I said, okay. Little indicators that might be, something else. So I put it on my hoist. I put it up in the air. I go to the tire that was making the noise. I take the wheel and I shake it like this, and it is loose. I mean, this thing, if you would have been on the highway for say a half an hour, more than likely, at least two of those lug bolts would have come off, if not the whole tire. And I think Tanya talked about some of that issues with tires with trucks. When those tires come off, they're deadly. I mean, they will come off at massive speed. If it's the front end of your car, you lose control of that car because that thing comes off, your car tilts to the front end. That 120 kilometer an hour tire comes catapulting off your vehicle, more than likely crosses the highway and hits the vehicle going the other direction at equal speed. And as we all know from physics class, that 120 and 120 is 240 kilometers an hour accident with that tire. And I think, well, there was one in Toronto there this spring where the woman was in I think it was a BMW SUV, and the tire went right through the front windshield and just missed her. It would have killed her instantly. But thank goodness it went in the center of the vehicle. Getting to the story is, if you're going to do maintenance on your car, personally, you'd think you'd want to make sure that you hand tighten at the end. And I just pass along myself, I changed my own tires. Of course, I have a lift in my garage on all our vehicles. The last thing I do for any car that I do a brake job or tire change, I hand check every tire, every lug nut. Why? Because I don't want that to happen to a person that I know or that I'm as a business for, because I don't want the lawsuit. I don't want to be responsible for having somebody killed. And that happens, I mean, it does happen, and it's something that we can avoid by making sure, when tires are changed. If we go back a few years ago, 10 years ago, very few people put snow tires on their cars. I mean, I didn't. I drove around in my all-season radials until they were too slippery to be driving around in. Now everybody changes their tires in the fall and in this. And believe me, yes, no tires are better than the all-season tires. But when that happens, make sure that whoever did that work did it right, because again, those tires come off, and it's your life and other people's lives that you're risking. So that's one thing I want to pass along when it comes to vehicles. That your mechanic is a very important person to you and to your family. You should make sure that they're trustworthy. If you have any questions, there's tons of mechanics out there. They should do a great job for you. If you doubt that, get a second opinion. If you get I had a car, I think it was one of our Honda Accords. I saw it dripping in the front end. Took it to I won't say a dealer. Anyway, I won't say who it was. A reputable, supposedly brake place. And I said, I got this oil dripping down. He said, oh, I'll look at it. Sure enough, he says, you need a new rack and pinion, right? And I said, okay, that's odd, but take your word for it. So I got underneath the car myself, and I looked. It wasn't the rack and pinion. That rack and pinion job was, I think that was about 10 years ago. That was a $1,200 job he ordered. I never went back there again. So nothing wrong with getting a second opinion. If the price of whatever they're recommending seems kind of high to you, like a transmission job with $6,000. If it seems kind of high, yeah, you should get a second opinion. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money out of your pocket. So yeah, I mean, if it's $50, no big deal, right? If it's several thousand, go to a go to a different mechanic. Everybody has a favorite mechanic, and there's lots around. So that's one thing I want to pass along. What was another one? Oh yeah, new versus used. This is always the proverbial question I get from people: new versus used. New cars come with warranties, and they're great. You got to watch the extended warranty, because my experience when I bought my only first new car, that the air conditioning went a year and a half after, it was not covered, and I had paid $900 for an extended warranty. I didn't buy from them ever again. But anyway, getting back to it, new cars have their advantages, right? Chances are it's going to go for a long time before you need any serious maintenance. That's why you buy a new car, right? you don't want to have to pull into the garage in 2 or 3 months and say, hey, I need a bearing, front bearing's gone, or you need wheel hub or whatever. And yeah, if you do your homework, as I mentioned there, the Consumer Report magazine, and do some research online, you probably get a fairly reliable vehicle. But my personal experience has been buying a reliable vehicle used saves you money right off the bat. The depreciation, especially if you're buying a high-end vehicle these days, it can be $10,000 in the first year of depreciation. I bought my TSX last spring for $10,000, and it only had 76,000 kilometers on it. So my experience again is that used cars are a better deal for the average Joe, and maybe I gotta admit it, I can afford a brand new car. I can. I don't, and that's the reason why. I had a neighbor right beside me. he had a Toyota Camry, very nice car, in 4-cylinder Camry, early 2000s. It was getting old, right? But he went out and got talked into a new vehicle. Let's just say it's a General Motors product, and he was not happy with it. Didn't take long, that he was not happy with this vehicle. Great salesman. I'd probably hire him if I knew him, but he went from a really reliable vehicle to a vehicle, especially the one that model that he did, and I'll be careful so I don't get sued. It had a record of being not a reliable vehicle. So, it wouldn't have taken him long to figure that out online or Consumer Reports. Just stay away from even new cars that aren't reliable. It doesn't make sense to me. Why would you do that? If you want to go from A to B. So what if it has a nice dash console that has backup camera and Bluetooth and navigation, stuff that I put in people's cars all the time. But don't buy a car just on that.
So I guess what you're actually saying then is, if you're going to buy a vehicle, to it's probably a good idea to have in mind what the use is, what you're going to use it for, and do your market research before you get there. Because the issue is that a lot of times when we go to make any type of purchase, and being this is a business call, it's how well the person that's showing you it, right? So all of a sudden you've went, I've done it before, how often, I'm not saying a car, but you go to purchase something, you don't even buy what you were actually going to purchase, because the salesperson has done such a good job of telling you how much this is going to be better. And, I guess when I did buy my 2 new cars, it was like I was going for black and I ended up with red. I was going for standard and I ended up with automatic. I knew what I wanted when I went, but the person did such a good job. So it's really, I think that's really relevant to anybody. Have an idea of what you want, then stick by your morals and just make sure that they don't sway you. And if they do, make sure you do your research, I guess.
Yes, and that has been my experience with most salespeople I've ever met in my life. They really don't know the ins and outs, the technical parts of let's say cars. Very few salespeople know the technical parts about the vehicles they're selling. What they are good at is selling. and that's what they're hired for. And yeah, they, you know, they know. In fact, they're if you know anything about automobile salespeople, they know what's in the inventory. They know from the boss what they're pushing, and they will push you towards whatever makes them the most money. That's their job. That's, you know, that most commission in their pocket. Now, there are, you know, better versus worse salespeople out there. I'm not going to say they're all, you know, they're all out to steal your money, but you got to remember that their job is to make money in their pockets, and the best way to make money is to sell you whatever gets the most commission in their pockets. So be aware of that. When you're right there, Margaret. When you go in, Margaret Ann, I'm sorry. When you go into a dealership, don't expect that salesperson to be telling you anything other than what he wants to tell you. You should go in there saying, okay, I'm looking at this car. Let me take it out for a ride. I'll make a decision. I'll take it. Well, again, when I bought my TSX, I didn't just drive it around the block and say, yeah, I'm buying it. I took it to my mechanic. I mean, I spent time looking at the car. You know, even though I know a fair bit about vehicles, I don't just rely on myself. You know, second opinions, you know, do matter. I knew that Acura is a Honda product. I knew it was, you know, my research was that it had a 2.4 liter engine that was a decent engine, not a lot of problems with. Anyway, what I'm getting at is don't let the salesman sway you. That's their job.
Make educated decisions. And again, I think that that's really relevant with any business. It's like, have an idea what you want before you go in. And yes, we can all sway a little bit, maybe with the color if you want it right away, as opposed to having to wait 2 weeks or whatever. But just do that. And just because I'm on here, I'm going to confirm. I did text my husband to make sure I had the numbers right. And yes, it was $6,000 for that transmission. Because I thought, am I saying the wrong number? No, I'm saying the right number.
I could be wrong, but I bet even today you could buy a brand new transmission and have it installed for $6,000.
Okay, you know what? I'll probably be texting you later. So anybody listening to Ottawa, don't you worry. We're going to have Sam's information into the chat underneath, and then you can reach out to him if you have any questions about your.
I don't want to pick on him. You know, I mean, hey, it happens to everybody that, you know, you end up. Well, when somebody wants to do some work and doesn't give you an estimate, that's not a good sign either.
No. Yeah.
When I did get our little Miata, the transmission done for our daughter, I got an estimate ahead of time. He said it could go, you know, 100 one way or the other, but he gave me an estimate of 2,500, and I think it came to 24 something. So, you know, you should have a pretty good idea beforehand.
Yeah, sorry? It was an unusual case. Okay, so because I want to make sure we get everything in, extending the life of your business investments. So you talked about the oils and reliability and inspections. Do it yourself. When does that work? Do you want to hone a little bit more in that? Do it yourself. When does that really work?
If do it yourself means that you have no knowledge of automobiles, you're going to cost yourself money. So example would be that guy with that tire that changed his own tires. I charged him $50 for tightening up his lugs. I mean, really, he could have gone to the lube shop and got it done, right? It would have saved him money and all that effort he did too, right? So, you know, if you don't have any knowledge of automobiles, playing around with them, you know, you could hurt yourself, you know, you could hurt your other people. And it could cost you, like, you're breaking things. I mean, you know, just don't. If you have a trusted mechanic, they're worth a lot more than the money you pay them per hour. That is my opinion, and I will stick with it. And I'm not saying it because I fix cars. They are worth a lot more than I mean, nowadays you pay $100 an hour on average. Yeah, you know, that mechanic can save you money by telling you, hey, you need to fix your brakes now because, you know, you're going to have an accident and not be able to stop. Your shock is making a bit of noise, but, you know, you don't need to do it now. You can wait a month or two, or maybe a year or two. those are good mechanics. When they tell you what needs to be done right away, what can wait for late, for a year or two, or what, hey, well, I had this the other day. One of my neighbor's daughters, she's home by herself. Let's put it this way. She's a 20-year-old, but she's at home and her parents are at the cottage. She's panicking. Something wrong with my car. And I go, what? She's making this awful noise. And I said, can you come over? I said, oh, sure, I'll come over. And she says, when I put it in gear, it makes this awful clanging noise. I'm afraid that wherever I go, I might, damage the car, So I get underneath the car, I look, and it's this heat shield around the catalytic converter, right? And it's a Nissan product, by the way. Very common problem with Nissan products. It's a heat shield that keeps the heat away from the bottom of the vehicle. But, as the car gets a little bit older, it's aluminum, and the bolts, unfortunately, they put a different material, different metal, and different. You know anything about physics? Again, you put two different metals together, what happens?
Corrosion.
Right, corrosion. They rust. So that's exactly what happened. Anyway, so it was a minor thing. I bring it over to my place. I'll put it on the hoist. It took me half an hour to fix it up for her. Put bigger washers that up underneath the holding it back up for a car. So again, would you took that to a dealer? That's at least $120 right off the bat. But saying that, there are things that you could do yourself, but really somebody that has some experience is important.
So I like the fact you're saying trust. So one of the key things I'm getting, find a mechanic that you trust and maybe be consistent with that person, build a relationship. And then they might be apt to just tell you that that's working. I love the thing. It's exactly that. This is what you need to fix in ASAP. This is going to be the future, so that it just builds that trust. So all those things. And I'm going to move you forward to aftermarket. Keeping your value. So what are the top 3 things that you consider keep the value of your vehicle?
Okay. And I mentioned one earlier, and that was the changing the oil, right? That's number 1, right? Next thing I want to tell people is, again, learn something about your automobile. Okay. Don't, if anything, know how to make sure your tire pressure is adequate, because you can wear down a set of tires real fast. You're underinflated. You also put yourself in danger if it's overinflated, but that's another thing. But one thing I do want to mention when it comes to keeping your car on the road for a long time, and especially because we live in the salt belt, and Americans like using that term salt belt to the northeast of the US, but we live in probably the saltiest conditions anywhere in Canada. As I lived on the West Coast, I lived on the East Coast. We just dump salt on our roads every winter. I have no idea why so much, but it's there. Anyway, one thing that we get is rusted cars, and that depreciates the value of your car. It also causes all kinds of problems underneath your car too. The metals rust faster. Back brakes, especially if you have disc brakes. I mentioned that a couple times in the Phoenix group. The back brakes take a lot of pressure because they don't get used that much, but the salt accumulates on them. So in the spring, the slider pins can go on them. A brake job in the back end, easy, could be low end 500, top end $1,000. So what I'm getting at is that get your car undercoated. I do not do that. It's not something I do personally because it's a really messy job. I don't want that stuff all over my garage. But I recommend it, get it done every year, at least once a year, If you drive your car like crazy, if you're say a real estate person or insurance, you might even consider doing it twice. Why? Well, I work on cars, and when they're all rusty underneath there, it takes me longer to get the bolts off. There's more problems, like things rusting and they break off. So I have to fix them. It takes longer. So, whether you use, your local guy, I don't care. Just, the old days we used to call oil spraying. If you get my age, you used to get it all sprayed and it would drip all over your driveway for a week or two. But in a way, it wasn't the worst thing because it was fairly cheap. But the main thing was it lubricated underneath your car and prevented that salt from penetrating into the metals. Nowadays, you can go to most shops and it's dripless. You might see a couple of drips. You might need to leave it out in the driveway, for a day or something like that. But yeah, get your car, treated. I don't care. I'm trying to stay away from brand names, but any kind of undercoating that prevents or reduces rust, that will keep your car running. And I know people that, again, getting back to leases, they're going to say, well, I'm only leasing the car for 5 years. I don't care what it looks like underneath afterwards. Well, you will when you bring that car in and the company, whatever, says to you, well, you got some rust spots here and look at your lease. It says the car has to be brought back in pristine condition. You have to pay for a body job. Oh, well, what's a body job cost? Well, about $1,000 these days. So, that $100 that you spent every year for 5 years adds up to $500. The body job costs you $1,000. Well, wait a minute, I'm out $500. So, but again, it just, but again, I'm a person that doesn't buy new. I buy used. I underspray every year, every car we own, religiously, and I buy that service from somebody else. I'm experimenting with some other things at home, but but anyway, just get it done. Get it done. If you drive whatever car you drive in the winter, I know that Tanya's husband doesn't drive that Camaro in the wintertime. If he does, shame on him. I have vehicles that I don't drive in the wintertime. Don't do those. But the ones that go through the winter, get them undercoated with whatever. And I recommend the dripless. It helps the mechanic. It makes the car last longer. One last thing I'd written down originally, and I get close to that, waxing your car. I was not a person that waxed this car much unless it was one of my summer cars, right? That I would, shine it up and make it look really nice and, and nice and, fancy, make it shine a little bit better than it did before. But the realization of wax, actually, it does a couple of things for your vehicle. And the one thing, other than making it shiny, it helps the paint when you get, chips. And if you have a vehicle, especially if you live in the Quebec side, or if you live in Alberta, there's what they throw on the roads in the wintertime isn't just salt. They throw small, not grains of sand. They throw small pebbles on the road. and if you ever seen a car that came from Alberta, the front end is just holes everywhere. So anyway, what I'm getting at is that if you spend some time, and a waxing job shouldn't take you more than an hour on the average vehicle. If you own a semi tractor, it's going to take longer. But I mean, the average car or vehicle, an hour should be fine. You put the wax on on a nice day in the shade, and you take it off the next half an hour. That wax will actually help the paint. It actually help if you have chips from rusting. So yeah, I mean, get your husband, trick him to do it. Say it looks wonderful, it looks shiny, whatever you want to do. I would recommend these days putting wax on your car. It will, prevent the rust that we unfortunately all get. Eventually, when you own a car, 5 years, 5 years is kind of minimum. Then you start to see it in the quarter panels, and it's there. Some cars are worse than others. Certain models are worse than others, and I could go on about those, but I'm not going to. But yeah, put some wax on your car.